This is Michael Clara coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah. Just doing another installment on my federal whistleblower case against the Utah Transit Authority. And this is September 2017. This one is titled the December 2015 UTA Termination Hearing. So before I go on, let me just do a quick outline as far as a timeline is concerned. And what happened was back in October of 2015, Utah Transit Authority was improving bus stops along the 200 South corridor, and I was working as a transit planner at the time, and part of my responsibility was to inspect new bus stops and authorize their installation or removal or relocation of bus stops. And there was certain things that I had to go through in terms of criteria with local policy and federal regulations in order to make those approvals. And I was doing that at the end of October because the Capital Development Department at UTA had made a number of upgrades, but they did not meet the Americans with Disability Act standard, and they were in violation of that federal law and did not meet UTA's safety criteria. So what ends up happening is the following, and the last week of October, I go on vacation, but the first week of my vacation, I ended up staying at work and working. And that's what these pictures are showing. It just so happens that I had pictures because that's typically what I have to do, is document a lot of the stuff that I'm approving or not approving. And so during that first week of my vacation, I stayed at work and worked. And my boss was aware of that. He had emails, we exchanged emails. He was aware that I stayed at work that first week. So what I did is extended took my 2-week vacation. And when I was into my second week of my vacation, my job was terminated. And this is a copy of the termination letter that I got, and I already did a 5-minute blog entry showing how my attorney during this trial that just happened this past week was able to demonstrate that Christopher Chestnut, who was my boss at the time, had falsified a lot of the information in this termination letter and literally lied about the circumstances that led up to my termination. That was on November 20th. I was terminated by phone, and then I got the letter later in the week. We discovered through the discovery process, that there was a series of emails that went out the following day, Saturday, and I'll cover these in another blog entry, but between the chairman at the time and the CEO of Utah Transit Authority, and then here the CEO is talking to, emailing my boss's boss saying that Christopher briefed me on Friday on the Clara termination. I figured we'd hear about it. And it's odd that the CEO would be involved in my termination. And of course, we didn't know this until much later. And then here's another email exchange between them on the Saturday, and this is the 21st. And of course, I got fired on that Friday. And then here's another one on Sunday, another email exchange about this situation. But I'll cover those in another blog entry. What I want to cover today is this incident that happened after I got fired on December 14th. I ended up on an appeal hearing. And let me restate that. I was fired on November 20th, which was a Friday. I appealed it in writing, and they would never give me copies of the policies that I was to follow or that governed my termination. I didn't get those until later, after I was done with the process. I even had hired an attorney to ask them for it, and they said they didn't have to give it to me. So I was at a bit of a disadvantage at this point going into this appeal hearing. They set it for December 14th, and it was Camille Glenn with the Human Resources Department, David Heyer, and Matt Sibul. So I recorded the meeting, and they were not aware that I was recording it. I recorded it. In Utah, you can do that without telling people that you're recording, and I did it for my own safety because they were already being deceitful. And it was a good thing that I did record it, because you'll see later they try to act like they denied what was actually said in there. And so anyways, let's listen in on a portion of what happened at that meeting, and I'll explain why this part of it is significant. So this meeting, like, are you guys are reconsidering bringing me back? I mean, the way every indication I have is I'm done. You guys have terminated me. Didn't ask for an explanation about what happened until a month later. I mean, so what happens next then in this process?
So, you want to speak to that?
Well, sure. So based on the information that you've provided us today, also in conjunction with your appeal letter, we'll take everything into consideration.
Okay.
Make a final determination. I mean, yes, as of the 20th, your employment with UTA is terminated, and then if there's been any information contrary to what we've already believed, there may be, it's a different decision.
And how long will that take to make?
Probably a couple of days.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't want this to drag out, and so the idea of it took us a while to get this meeting together, but we wanted to make sure that we had we had to cross-tabulate a lot of discussions between Christopher and Joey and so forth, and so that's what got us to this point, to have the subsequent discussion with you.
Okay.
And then, like Camille said, establish if there's any other information that needs to be considered, before that final piece would happen in the next few days.
Okay. Okay.
So that was the date.
So the expectation then is that, I guess so the expectation is, what I'm understanding you guys saying is that I say I'm going to go on vacation from the 27th to the 11th, but even though I stayed here and worked the whole first week, there was an expectation then on you guys' part that I should have been back on the 11th, and still, even though I wasn't on vacation the first week I stayed here and worked, I'm still supposed to be back on that because that was on my.
No, I don't think that's the case. I think the expectation is the communication with your manager.
Right.
Had that conversation have happened.
Yeah. That's the issue, is that you may or may not have been, all these days you talked about, the 27th,
right,
all the way through November 2nd. Christopher, your supervisor, did not know, if in fact you were doing work for UTA, that you were. And so he had no idea that you planned on just extending your vacation later by a week.
So you're saying that he had no idea that I worked that I was here?
No. He was not a part of those, if you were on a bus talking with, CJ and Joey, was he a part of those meetings?
No, but he was part of emails that I would give reports on what happened and stuff. And then I think there was even an email I got that he wanted me to go look at some stuff, to go white line some bus stops. And him and Colton emailed me, if I recall correctly, that it was during that week that
You're saying there is some additional correspondence that we would want to search out that would indicate that he knew you were supposed to be on vacation and also was directing you to do some additional work?
Well, yeah, because when I put the meeting request that I was going to be gone the 27th on, and then he knew I was at work that whole week because he was having me do stuff, and I was reporting back to him on what happened and what was. So what is significant there, the reason I'm playing that is because, again, this is a month after I was fired. It's supposed to be my appeal hearing, but again, they don't give me any copies of the policies. They admitted to that. When the day I got fired over the phone, I went into UTA, met with Camille Glenn, and asked her. Actually, I asked Chris Justin on the phone, "Can you send me? Can I get a copy of the policy?" I went into UTA to get a copy of the policy that governs what they were using to terminate me and what my appeal process was. And then Camille said that she would mail it to me. She never did, and she admitted that at the trial last week that I was asking for it. I eventually had to do a grammar request, but of course I didn't get it until after the whole process is done. But what is significant about this audio is that I was telling them I didn't abandon my job. I went to work. Worked the first week of my vacation. So then I just started the 2-week vacation following that. And then you heard Matt Sibul say that he had no idea that was the case, that my boss, Chris Chestnut, didn't know, and that they would need to look into it, is what he said in this appeal hearing. And I thought that was odd, but at the time, December 2015, there was nothing I could do about the fact that, they didn't believe me. And I thought it was weird that they didn't already know that, because everybody saw me at work. But at this point, I don't have access to emails or pictures or anything at the time to show that. So I had to depend on their honesty and integrity to look into it and be fair, which I thought they were going to do. What ends up happening is on this week of December 17th, I get a letter from Matt Sibul saying that he's upholding my termination. And so we go forward from there. So I ended up filing the whistleblower case, complaint, if you will, filing the federal whistleblower case with OSHA, which is with the U.S. Department of Labor. And that was in December of 2015. And then in January of 2016 is when the U.S. Department of Labor notifies Utah Transit Authority that a complaint has been filed. And also in January 2016, the Salt Lake Tribune wrote a story about what happened. And it's, again, these two elements that I'm talking about, the improvements on 200 South, and then the fact that they fabricated me, terminating me from my job. And I'll show you a little more about that fabrication here before this ends. But following that newspaper article, the CEO of UTA, who is aware that I've been terminated and the circumstances surrounding it, he's more worried about public relations. And he asked Andrea Packer, do we have a plan to address this? It's one thing to claim unfair firing, but these accusations are serious. I'd like to issue a statement on Monday. I'm sure you discussed it before the story hit. If you have a minute, can you give me your thoughts before I meet with Chairman Burton tomorrow? And then, thanks, Andrea. Let's talk tomorrow. I'd like to issue a statement on the Tribune to non-Tribune media that reinforces the message that safety is first, and that employees are encouraged to and appreciated for bringing safety issues forward. It would be good to include a couple of examples of safety improvements brought forward by employees. I'd like to address the 200 South and tracks crossing issue as well. So do you see here, in spite of the fact that they terminated me for bringing up safety issues, they're going to go on a public relations counteroffensive and say that they are doing the very thing that they're not. So this is the schizophrenia of UTA management. So here, what happened in January 2016 also, and this was the topic of another blog entry that I did, another video that I did about Chris Chestnut and his role in this. This is where, again, keep in mind this timeline, that in January 2016, Chris Chestnut is still maintaining, I was not aware that Michael was doing some UTA work from October 27, October 30th, because I didn't have any further communication with him after October. And in the other video that I've made on this, you'll see that my attorney was able to prove that he was lying. In this particular case, in January of 2016, the Utah Transit Authority, and this is sent in by Lisa Bowman, who's our senior corporate counsel. Now, keep in mind, at the time, they were not aware that I had recorded my appeal hearing. But they wrote to the OSHA investigator at the Department of Labor that on December 14, 2015, Mr. Clara met with Human Resources Generalist Camille Glenn, Human Resource Client Service Manager David Heyer, and Chief Planning Officer Matt Sibul to discuss his appeal. During that discussion, Mr. Clara failed to provide any justification for his failure to return to work on November 18th, or provide any explanation as to why he could not have contacted Mr. Chestnut during that time. Mr. Sibul subsequently affirmed the decision to terminate Mr. Clara for job abandonment, and see attached letter. And I already showed you the letter. So again, this is what they wrote to OSHA in 2016, because they were not aware that I had made a recording of the meeting back on December 14th. So this is what my concern is from a public trust issue is that you have these people, Matt Sibul, Camille Glenn, and David Heyer, who are complicit in this kind of fabrication to get rid of me. And it's not just about me. It's just my concern is that we need to ask ourselves is, what else are they lying about? If this is the lack of integrity that exists at UTA on this level of management, this is the problem. Changing the board structure or putting it somewhere else, it's still rotten at its core when these kinds of people are the ones that are making decisions. And all for a cover-up. So in February of 2016, this continues at the Department of Workforce Services. When I applied for unemployment benefits, I was denied. I had to appeal here. And the reason I'm being denied is because the people that are listening to this are believing what UTA is saying. And so here again, I can ask my boss questions, Chris Chestnut at the time, and then in Exhibit 37, which was already the focus of another blog entry, that he just lied. He says, that verbally he says it, and in writing he says it, and then again you'll have to watch that other blog entry to show how my attorney was able to demonstrate that Chris was just a dishonest person and just out and out lied to ensure that my termination would stick. A year later, almost, which puts us now in January 2017, I received a letter from the investigator of OSHA, and he did not rule in my favor. So that's when I hired Austin Egan of Stravos Law, and this is where they filed my appeal. And then we were able to go through that process. And then through that process of the appeal, you have to go through discovery, through depositions, and it's an arduous path that one has to take. And again, it started in January of 2017 and just ended last week, this part of it at least, in September of 2017 with a 3-day trial. But before we get there, I want to point something out that in June 7th of 2017, my attorney was able to depose Matt Sibul at his office, in my attorney's office at Stravos Law. And so by this point, UTA is aware that we're aware of their deceptions, and he's under oath now. He has to come clean, and this is what he says. My attorney asked him, Mr. Sibul, when did you first learn that Mr. Clare had performed work during the week of October 27th through November 1st? And then the answer is, I don't know if I can give you an exact date. It was prior to the meeting with Mr. Clara. My attorney says prior to December 14th, and Matt Sibul says correct. And then my attorney asks, presses a little more, what was it prior to November 20th? And he says, I don't know. I can't remember. Okay, fair enough. My attorney says, how did you discover that Mr. Clare had performed that work before Mr. Clare talked about it in the meeting, that, referring to the December 14th meeting? He says, I sat down and talked with Joey and with Christopher. So what's significant about that is that Chris Chestnut, and I've already talked about that in another entry, but it's worth repeating, as of December 14th, if he had already told Matt Sibul, then he had no business other than he's just a liar and a dishonest person that has no integrity whatsoever. That's why in January he could lie at my appeal hearing and say that he had no knowledge of me working that first week. Therefore, that contributed to him making the decision to terminate my employment. So, going back again to this December 14th meeting, you heard the audio where Matt Sibul is saying that Christopher didn't know, he doesn't know. And my concern is, where are these two people from Human Resources? I thought they were there to safeguard and to help managers make decisions appropriately so that they don't get into these kinds of situations. This is costing me a lot of money. This is costing UTA a lot of money. And this could have been solved at the appeals hearing. Well, if you're naive, and like I was at the time, and think, it could, and that you're dealing with people that have some sense of, just some basic sense of honesty, which these people don't. And so again, there's a larger issue here. My case is going to take care of itself, but the larger issue is that you have these people that make UTA rotten at its very core. And it doesn't matter how much you change the structure of it, with these people running it, you're still going to have problems. So again, here now we're at September 2017. Channel 2 News did a story last week on me going to trial, and we had the 3-day trial. It's one thing to know that you're right and that the truth is on your side. It's quite another thing to be able to prove it. And then for me, I really have a lot of appreciation for my attorney, Austin Egan. I told somebody last week, I said, man, this guy's really sharp. He did a good job. And they said, well, Michael, coming from you, that's high praise, which anybody that knows me and knows how critical I am of things, this man has earned my respect and my admiration, because he went against UTA and all their attorneys. They hired an outside counsel at one point, and all their resources brought to bear. He was able to withstand that and be able to prove in a trial that they are just, in my opinion, it's just evil. It's administrative evil, bureaucratic evil, and he was very successful in unmasking it. So, it's one thing that this trial is done. We have 60 days now that we wait for the decision of the judge. And in the meantime, I believe with the next legislative session coming up, we need to do some things to help other UTA employees. I know of other people that have been fired but didn't have the resources or the time that I had to be able to confront this Goliath, if you will. And so, I think there's some things we can talk about. Some people have already reached out to me, and we're looking at some other solutions that we can do to help UTA with some checks and balances, because having these people there and being able to lie and then bring to bear the resources of UTA, which at the end of the day is our tax dollars. It's just crazy. And so something needs to change in that organization. And so in the meantime, they got this guy, Matt Sibul, who's a government relations specialist. And for anybody who has to deal with him, good luck if you believe anything that's coming out of his mouth. Thank you.